Hello, everybody. This is Psychology of the Unconscious by Carl Jung. Part 2, Chapter 3, Part 1. The Transformation of the Libido, a Possible Source of Primitive Human Discoveries. In the following pages, I'll endeavor to picture a concrete example of the transition of the libido. I once treated a patient who suffered from a depressive catatonic condition. The case was one of only a slightly introversion psychosis, and therefore the existence of many hysterical features was not surprising. In the beginning of the analytical treatment, while telling of a very painful occurrence, she fell into a hysterical dreamy state in which she showed all signs of sexual excitement. For obvious reasons, she lost the knowledge of my presence during this condition. The excitement led to a masturbative act, frictio femorum. This act was accompanied by a peculiar gesture. She made a very violent rotary motion with the forefinger of her left hand on the left temple, as if she were boring a hole there. Afterwards, there was complete amnesia for what had happened, and there was nothing to be learned about the queer gesture with her hand. Although this act can easily be likened to a boring into the mouth, nose, or ear, now transferred to the temple, it belongs in the territory of infantile ludus sexualis, to the preliminary exercise preparatory to sexual activity. Without really understanding it, this gesture nevertheless seemed very important to me. Many weeks later, I had an opportunity to speak to the patient's mother, and from her I learned that her daughter had been a very exceptional child. When only 2 years old, she would sit with her back to an open cupboard door for hours and rhythmically beat her head against the door, to the distraction of the household. A little later, instead of playing as other children, she began to bore a hole with her finger in the plaster of the wall of the house. She did this with little turning and scraping movements, and kept herself busy at this occupation for hours. She was a complete puzzle to her parents. From her 4th year, she practiced onanism. It is evident that in this early infantile activity, the preliminary stage of a later trouble may be found. The especially remarkable features in this case are, first, that the child did not carry out the action on its own body, and secondly, the assiduity with which it carried on its action. One is tempted to bring these two facts into a causal relationship and to say, because the child does not accomplish this action on her own body, perhaps that's the reason of the assiduity, for by boring into the wall she never arrives at the same satisfaction as if she executed the activity onanistically on her own body. The very evident onanistic boring of the patient can be traced back to the very early stage of childhood, which is prior to the period of local onanism. The time is still psychologically very obscure because individual reproductions and memories are lacking to a great extent, the same as among animals. The race characteristics, manner of life, predominate during the entire life of the animal, whereas among men the individual character asserts itself over the race type. Granting the correctness of this remark, we're struck with the apparently wholly incomprehensible individual activity of this child at this early age. We learn from her later life history that her development, which is, as always the case, intimately interwoven with parallel external events, has led to that mental disturbance which is especially well known on account of its individuality and the originality of its productions, that is, dementia praecox. The peculiarity of this disturbance, as we pointed out above, depends upon the predominance of the fantastic form of thought, of the infantile in general. From this type of thinking proceed all those numerous contacts with mythological products, and that which we consider as original and wholly individual creations are very often creations which are comparable with nothing but those of antiquity. I believe that this comparison can be applied to all formations of this remarkable illness, and perhaps also to the special symptom of boring. We have already seen that the onanistic boring of the patient dated from the very early stage of childhood. That is to say, it was reproduced from that period of the past. The sick woman fell back for the first time into the early onanism only after she had been married many years, and following the death of her child, with whom she had identified herself through an overindulgent love. When the child died, the still healthy mother was overcome by early infantile symptoms in the form of scarcely concealed fits of masturbation, which were associated with this very act of boring. As already observed, the primary boring appeared at the time which preceded the infantile onanism localized in the genitals. This fact is of significance in so far as this boring differs thereby from a similar later practice which appeared after the genital onanism. The later bad habits represent as a rule a substitution for repressed genital masturbation, or for an attempt in this direction. As such, these habits, finger-sucking, biting the nails, picking at things, boring into the ears and nose, etc., may persist far into adult life as regular symptoms of a repressed amount of libido. As has already been shown above, the libido in youthful individuals at first manifests itself in the nutritional zone, when food is taken in, the act of suckling, with rhythmic movements and every sign of satisfaction. With the growth of the individual and the development of his organs, the libido creates for itself new avenues to supply its needs of activity and satisfaction. The primary model of rhythmic activity, producing pleasure and satisfaction, must now be transferred to the zone of other functions, with sexuality as its final goal. A considerable part of the hunger libido is transferred into the sexual libido. This transition does not take place suddenly at the time of puberty, as is generally supposed, but very gradually in the course of the greater part of childhood. The libido can free itself only with difficulty and very slowly from that which is peculiar to the function of nutrition, in order to enter into the peculiarity of the sexual function. Two periods are to be distinguished in this state of transition, so far as I can judge: the epoch of suckling and the epoch of displaced rhythmic activity. Suckling still belongs to the function of nutrition, but passes beyond it, however, in that it no longer is the function of nutrition, but rhythmic activity, with pleasure and satisfaction as the goal, without the taking of nourishment. Here the hand enters as an auxiliary organ. In the period of the displaced rhythmic activity, the hand appears still more clearly as the auxiliary organ. The gaining of pleasure leaves the mouth zone and turns to other regions. The possibilities are now many. As a rule, other openings in the body become objects of the libido interest, then the skin, or special portions of that. The activity expressed in these parts, which can appear as rubbing, boring, picking, and so forth, follows a certain rhythm and serves to produce pleasure. After longer or shorter tarrying of the libido at these stations, it passes onward until it reaches the sexual zone, and there for the first time can be occasion for the beginnings of onanistic attempts. In its migration, the libido takes more than a little of the function of nutrition with it into the sexual zone, which readily accounts for the numerous and innate correlations between the functions of nutrition and sexuality. If, after the occupation of the sexual zone, an obstacle arises against the present form of application of the libido, then there occurs, according to the well-known laws, a regression to the nearest station lying behind, to the two above-mentioned periods. It's now of special importance that the epoch of displaced rhythmic activity coincides in a general way with the time of the development of the mind and of speech. It might be designated the period from birth until the occupation of the sexual zone as the pre-sexual stage of development. This generally occurs between the 3rd and 5th year, and is comparable to the chrysalis stage in butterflies. It's distinguished by the irregular commingling of the elements of nutrition and sexual functions. Certain regressions follow directly back from the pre-sexual stage, and judging from my experience, this seems to be the rule in the regression of dementia praecox. I'll give 2 brief examples. One case concerns a young girl who developed a catatonic state during her engagement. When she saw me for the first time, she came up suddenly, embraced me, and said, "Oh, Papa, give me something to eat." The other case concerns a young maidservant who complained that people pursued her with electricity, and this caused a queer feeling in her genitals, as if I ate and drank down there. These regressive phenomena show that even from the distance of the modern mind, those early stages of the libido can be regressively reached. One may assume, therefore, that in the earliest states of human development, this road was much more easily traveled than it is today. It becomes then a matter of great interest to learn whether traces of this have been preserved in history. We owe our knowledge of the ethnologic fantasy of boring to the valuable work of Abraham, who also refers us to the writings of Adalbert Kuhn. Through this investigation we learn that Prometheus, the fire-bringer, may be a brother of the Hindu Pramanta. That is to say, of the masculine fire-rubbing piece of wood. The Hindu fire-bringer is called Matarichvan, and the activity of the fire preparation is always designated in the hieratic text by the verb manthami, which means shaking, rubbing, bringing forth by rubbing. Kuhn has put this verb in connection with the Greek, which means to learn, and has been explained this conceptual relationship. The tertium comparationis might lie in the rhythm, the movement to and fro in the mind. According to Kuhn, the root manth or math must be traced from Greek words for I learn, who is the Greek fire robber, through the unauthorized Sanskrit word Prometheus, which comes by way of Pramanta, which possesses the double meaning of rubber and robber. The transition of Prometheus was effected. With that, however, the prefix pra causes special difficulty, so that the whole derivation was doubted by a series of authors, and was held in part as erroneous. On the other hand, it was pointed out that as the Thoric Zeus bore the especially interesting cognomen, thus Prometheus might not be an original Indo-Germanic stem word that was related to the Sanskrit pramanta, but might represent only a cognomen. This interpretation is supported by a gloss of Hesychius, Prometheus, the herald of Titans. Another gloss of Hesychius explains that the words attain the meaning of the flaming one. The relation of Prometheus to Pramanta could scarcely be so direct as Kuhn conjectures. The question of an indirect relation is not decided with that. Above all, Prometheus is of great significance as a surname for a Greek, since the flaming one is the forethinker. Pramati, precaution, is also an attribute of Agni, although Pramati is of another derivation. Prometheus, however, belongs to the line of Phlegians, which was placed by Kuhn in uncontested relationship to the Indian priest family of Bhrigu. The Bhrigu were like Matarichvan, the one swelling in the mother, also fire-bringers. Kuhn quotes a passage according to which Bhrigu also arises from the flame like Agni. In the flame Bhrigu originated. Bhrigu boasted but did not burn. This view leads to a root related to Bhrigu, that is to say to the Sanskrit bhre, to light, Latin fulgeo, in Greek Sanskrit bhargas, splendor, Latin fulgur. Bhrigu appears therefore as the shining one. The Greek word means a certain species of eagle on account of its burnished gold color. The connection which signifies to burn is clear. The Phlegians were also the fire eagles. Prometheus also belongs to the Phlegians. The path from Pramanta to Prometheus passes not through the word, but through the idea, and therefore we should adopt the same meaning for Prometheus as that which Pramanta attains from the Hindu fire symbolism. The Pramanta, as a tool of Manthana, the fire sacrifice, is considered purely sexual in the Hindu. The Pramanta is phallus or man, the bored wood underneath is vulva or woman. The resulting fire is the child, the divine son Agni. The two pieces of wood are called, in the cult, Pururavas and Urachi, and were thought of personified as man and woman. The fire was born from the genitals of the woman. An especially interesting representation of fire production as a religious ceremony, Manthana, is given by Weber. A certain sacrificial fire was lit by the rubbing together of two sticks. One piece of wood is taken up with the words, "Thou art the birthplace of the fire," and two plates of grass are placed upon it. Ye are the two testicles, to the Arararani, the underlying wood. Thou art Urvachi, and then Uttararani, that which is placed on top, is anointed with butter. Thou art power. This is then placed on the Arararani. Thou art Pururavas, and both are rubbed 3 times. I rub thee with Gayatri Metram. I rub thee with Trishtubam Metram. I rub thee with Jagatir Metram. The sexual symbolism of this fire production is unmistakable. We see here also the rhythm. The meter in its original place is sexual rhythm, rising above the mating call into music. A song of the Rig Veda conveys the same interpretation and symbolism. Here's the gear for function. Here tinder made ready for the spark. Bring thou the matron. We will rub Agni in ancient fashion forth. In the 2 fire sticks Jatavedas lieth, even as the well-formed germ in pregnant women. Agni, who day by day must be exalted by men who watch and worship with oblations. Lay this with care on that which lies extended. Straight hath she borne the steer when made prolific. With his red pillar, radiant in his splendor, in our skilled task is born the son of Ila. Side by side with the unequivocal coitus symbolism, we see that Pramantha is also Agni, the created sun. The phallus is the sun, or the sun is the phallus. Therefore Agni in the Vedic mythology has a 3-fold character. With this we're once more connected to the above-mentioned Kabiric father-son cult. In the modern German language we've preserved echoes of the primitive symbols. A boy is designated as Bengal, a short, thick piece of wood. In Hessian as Stift, or Bolzen, arrow, wooden peg, or stump. In Artemisia abrotanum, which is called in German Stabwurz, stickwort, is called in English boy's love. The vulgar designation of the penis as boy was remarked even by Grimm and others. The ceremonial production of fire was retained in Europe as late as the 19th century as a superstitious custom. Kuhn mentioned such a case even in the year 1828, which occurred in Germany. The solemn magic ceremony was called the Nodfear, the fire of need, and the charm was chiefly used against cattle epidemics. Kuhn cites from the Chronicle of Lannercross of the year 1268 an especially noteworthy case of the Nodfear, the ceremonies of which plainly reveal the fundamental phallic meaning. Instead of preserving the divine faith in its purity, the reader will call to mind the fact that in this year, when the plague, usually called lung sickness, attacked the herds of cattle in Laudonia, certain bestial men, monks in dress but not in spirit, taught the ignorant people of their country to make fire by rubbing wood together and to set up a statue of Priapus, and by that method to succor the cattle. After the Cistercian lay brother had done this near Fentone, in front of the entrance of the court, he sprinkled the animals with holy water and with the preserved testicles of a dog, etc. These examples, which allow us to recognize a clear sexual symbolism in the generation of fire, provide therefore, since they originate from different times and different peoples, the existence of a universal tendency to credit to fire production not only a magical, but also a sexual significance. This ceremony, or magical repetition of the very first ancient, long outlived observance, shows how insistently the human mind clings to the old forms, how deeply rooted in this very ancient reminiscence of fire-boring. One might almost be inclined to see in the sexual symbolism of fire production a relatively late addition to the priestly lore. This may indeed be true for the ceremonial elaboration of the fire mysteries, but whether originally the generation of fire was in general a sexual action, that is to say a coitus play, is still a question. That similar things occur among very primitive people we learn from the Australian tribe of the Watchkandis, who in the spring perform the following magic ceremonies of fertilization. They dig a hole in the ground, so formed and surrounded with bushes as to counterfeit the woman's genitals. They dance the night long around this hole. In connection with this, they hold spears in front of themselves in a manner to recall the penis in erection. They dance around the hole and thrust their spears into the ditch while they cry to it, Pulinera Wataka. Such obscene dances appear among other primitive races as well. In this spring incantation are contained the elements of the coitus play. This play is nothing but a coitus game, that is to say, originally this play was simply a coitus in the form of sacramental mating, which for a long time was a mysterious element among certain cults, and reappeared in sex. In the ceremonies of Zinzendorf's followers, echoes of the coitus sacrament may be recognized. also another sex. One can easily think that just as the above-mentioned Australian bushmen performed the coitus play in this manner, the same performance could be enacted in another manner, and indeed in the form of fire production. Instead of through two selected human beings, the coitus was represented by two substitutes, the pururavas and the urvachi, the phallus and vulva, by borer and opening. Just as the primitive thought behind our customs is really the sacramental coition, so here the primal tendency is really the act itself. For the act of fertilization is the climax, the true festival of life, and well worthy to become the nucleus of a religious mystery. If we're justified in concluding that the symbolism of the hole in the earth used by the Watchkandis for the fertilization of the earth takes place at the coitus, then the generation of fire could be considered in the same way as a substitute for coitus. And indeed, it might be further concluded that a consequence of this reasoning that the invention of fire-making is also due to the need of supplying a symbol for the sexual act.